Thank you very much. Thank you everybody here at Taqiyya for inviting me and organizing. Great. Shall we begin? Shall we begin, Mr. Teleprompter? Okay. When programmers were first programming computers to recognize speech for speech-to-text applications, the biggest challenge they faced was getting the computer to understand that each different voice it heard belonged to the same language. The computer heard each person as if they were speaking their own unique language. All the physical properties of speech, unique to each speaking body, the size of the palate, the depth of the larynx and lung capacity, in addition to regional accent, produces so much excess information that the computer could not understand how two people speaking the same word resembled each other in any way. And this computer, hearing each one of us speaking in a totally different language, makes us aware of the way we are also programmed to listen. We see how much of the voice of the other person we discard in favor of semantic content, how adept and focused we are on the system of language and not the speaker as a language. Over the last 5 years, computers, however, are starting to hear more and more like we do. And by example, today's live audio essay, which is called Contradiction, Speech Against Itself, is a first in the history of voice technologies. For those listening in German, I'm premiering a new automatic translation software. This works by translating live speech, my speech from English into English text, and then translate that text into German text, and then it gives voice to that German text, that German script, live into your ears seamlessly and almost simultaneously. This automatic translation system that I'm premiering today is software designed by an Israeli company called Per Se Limited, and the name of this software is Free Speech 4.0. In an unlikely and ironic turn of events, Free Speech 4.0 was made possible because of the whistleblower Edward Snowden. When he released the secret PowerPoint presentations of the US National Security Agency, he inadvertently released the missing part of a code that Per Se Limited programmers desperately needed to complete their translation algorithm. The NSA were using a top-secret, highly developed speech-to-text transcription that Edward Snowden leaked. They were so reliant on this software because even with the huge data centers they command, that not even the NSA had enough data storage capacity to be able to store all the world's phone calls, Skypes, Facebook, FaceTime, and WhatsApp audio files. Text is so much less data hungry than audio, and is so much easier to search through later. However, it couldn't be that they were using the same speech-to-text functions that were currently available, otherwise they would be storing a lot of nonsense. So this highly accurate NSA speech-to-text algorithm that Edward Snowden leaked and is now being applied to my voice via Per Se Limited is the way in which I'm being automatically translated into German. But the real genius of this translation system is not the accuracy of its transcription, but the way my German voice retains the expressions, emphases, and emotions of my original speaking voice. It does this by measuring the tensions of my vocal cords as it translates, and determines from them my kind of mental state, and therefore the intention behind the kind of non-verbal vocal emphasis that I bring to the words I speak. Again, Per Se Limited didn't invent this technique of emotional stress voice recognition. They also stole it. This time, it wasn't stolen from the NSA, but through industrial espionage that they conducted against a fellow Israeli company called Neme Cisco. You see, Neme Cisco developed something to measure emotional response via the vocal cords called Layered Voice Analysis 6.50. The application of LVA 6.50 is not for achieving an accurate vocal translation, but rather for use as a lie detector.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. 2 weeks ago, I reluctantly appeared before the TV cameras to defend myself against the bizarre allegations that were appearing about me in the news media dealing with last year's anthrax attacks. These allegations were fueled by ongoing leaks from the Justice Department and those leaks continue to this day. Several days ago, the Justice Department representatives confirmed to the Associated Press that there was no evidence linking me to the anthrax attacks. Despite this lack of evidence,
The premise, LVA 6.50,
victimized in a never
is that through a frequency analysis, the physiological conditions of stress are made audible by the non-verbal elements of a voice.
unnamed others.
This technology is said to be able to determine all sorts of psychological verdicts based on jittering frequencies, glottal tension, and vocal
My
intensity,
character.
all regardless of the language that you are speaking.
Government effort to show the American people that it is proceeding vigorously and successfully with the anthrax investigation.
It is currently employed as a lie detection method by the Los Angeles Police Department, Russian and Israeli governments, and insurance companies all over the world.
Americans directly.
The United Kingdom are using it to measure the veracity of benefit claims made by disabled citizens over the telephone. The main retailer of this software told me in an interview that based on the micro fluctuations of the vocal cords, LVA 6.50 can not only determine whether a person is lying, but is also able to deliver a whole series of verdicts,
Bureaucrats
such as
peddling groundless
embarrassment,
innuendo and half
overemphasis,
about
inaccuracy,
reporters
voice manipulation, anxiety, and whether or not the interviewee is attempting to outsmart his
I
interlocutor.
want to give you the American people
In the future, I was told it will even be able to profile someone's voice to find out if they are a sex offender.
a person of interest.
LVA 6.50 is a lie detector that situates the truth not in what you say, but in how you sound, in the object quality of your voice and not the words you speak. In this way, the voice becomes divided into the words we say and the way we say them. This division of the voice produces two different testimonies from one person's speech. One testimony on behalf of language, and the other testimony speaks on behalf of the body. Often these two testimonies are corroborated by each other, but they can also betray one another. An internal betrayal between language and body, between subject and object, between fact and fiction, exists in a single human utterance. So what does it mean to speak the truth in the era of free speech 4.0? In the face of this new regimes of listening, we still seem to cling to the increasingly outmoded rights and laws that govern our speech in society. For example, the human right to the freedom of speech. It may still be protecting what we say and the expression of our opinions, but not the expression of the voice itself. If the freedom of speech is to stand up to this new political context that our voice faces, it needs to be expanded to include and protect the sonic quality of our voices as well. Another of these laws, the right to silence, offers a mode of withdrawal from public speech, from the necessity to confess. Yet it is the very withholding of our voices that can mute our political agency. The withholding of our voices also alleges guilt by virtue of its very withholding, as we see from those in government who espouse the defense of NSA and LVA. They proclaim consistently that only people who fear these systems or don't want to participate are those who have something to hide. So I went looking for another way to add another legal right to these more tried and tested laws that govern our voices and patrol our ears. Looking for a precedent and a more robust means for our voices to retain their politics in the era of algorithmic regime of truth production, I found an old and esoteric piece of Islamic jurisprudence called Taqiyya. Taqiyya is an old and obscure Islamic law, originally Shia. In its simplest possible articulation, Taqiyya is a legal dispensation whereby a believing individual can deny his faith or commit otherwise illegal acts while they are at the risk of persecution or in a condition of statelessness. Taqiyya is often understood as the divine right to lie, though Taqiyya is not lying. But it is not lying either. Taqiyya is a contradictory condition of being simultaneously inside and outside of the law, like police informants who can legally commit illegal crimes whilst under the employment of the police. Taqiyya is an elusive strategy of survival that is both employed in day-to-day life and in the most perilous of situations. And for one little-known Islamic community called the Druze, Taqiyya is fundamental to their theological and social practice. For the Druze, prayer is typically private, and there are no mosques found in Druze communities. Taqiyya then is the concept through which the non-coercive religious activity of the Druze is maintained. So here the belief that making one's religious thoughts public is a form of kind of sacrilege against the private dialogue you would have with God. So taqiyya is not only a legal dispensation to lie and an act of dissimulation, but a technology of withdrawal from the fundamental obligation to perform oneself in public, to speak on behalf of one's self, to confess one's heart of hearts. The Druze are transnational, spread across the Levantine countries and concentrated in the mountain regions of Syria, Lebanon, Palestine or Israel. Their practice of taqiyya is a product of their geography, a form of communication forged at remote altitudes, at the fringes of failed states, in buffer zones and on ceasefire lines. Allahu Akbar! In late December of 2013, Jabhat Nusra Front, took control of the Idlib province in northern Syria. As a result, 18 Druze villages in the region became subject to mass conversions from the Druze doctrine to Wahhabi Islam. Saudi national Sheikh Saad Saeed al-Ghamidi led the mission. Al-Ghamidi's crusade to convert the Druze was extensively and proudly documented and uploaded. In the images we see Al-Ghamidi and Jabhat Nusra simultaneously armed with machine guns and humanitarian supplies as they entered the remote villages. Though the use of force here was always a present danger, violence was only ever enacted upon the speech of this community. It was their voices in particular that Al-Ghamidi came to elicit and take into custody. As there are no Druze mosques and they do not pray in public, the first act of Al-Ghamidi's conversion was to teach one member of the Druze community to become the person who sings the call to prayer. By teaching one of the Druze to become a muezzin, he constructs the loud audio infrastructure of Islam into villages which have only heard the hushed and private voice of religious belief before. The coercive and interpolating voice is still heard as a remnant of Al-Ghamidi's mission in the region, and he intends the azan to be billowed from atop of these mountains as a form of sonic conquest. The second act of domination over the voices of this community Al-Ghamidi performed was to sit in front of each of these villages, man, woman and child, and hear them say the speech act of Islamic conversion. Words that once uttered aloud would officially initiate them into Islam. In all this video material, we hear no comment from those Druze converts, and we only hear their voices as they are captured in the act of conversion or when they are singing the call to prayer. The silence of their resisted created a void of speech that was quickly filled by journalists and political commentators. Some claimed this conversion was merely an act of taqiyya, and that these conversions didn't count as they were forced under the threat of violence. Others claimed that the community willingly converted and celebrated the event as a step towards Islamic unification. In the absence of vocal resistance to the conversions, one began to hear in the voice of the Druze of Idlib whatever one wanted to hear. And one can never know whether this was an instance of taqiyya or the truth, because in any act of taqiyya, truth lies in the ears of its beholder. Taqiyya is never the expression of one clear position, but a multitude of statements that all emanate simultaneously from one voice. Each of its numerous truths are forged by and for the ears of its listener. So it became important for me to understand the events in Idlib, not only to get to the truth of what happened there, or not even to get to the truth of what happened there, But because locked into this event was the key to understanding the concept of truth in the age of free speech 4.0. So I went looking for answers, and first I went to the Druze scriptures. The book that they use, the religious book of the Druze, is never kept in one place. Rather, the chapters of the book are divided up, and each chapter is housed in different homes so that the book is dispersed across an entire village. I had immediate access to one chapter, and there was really nothing relevant to Taqiyya inside. So I went knocking on the door of the other houses in the village and see if some other person in the village might have the relevant chapter. And yet with every doorbell I rang, I was sent to another house in the village, and before I knew it, I had arrived back at the house I began, and without having had access to any other chapters of the book. So I sat there on the curb feeling defeated, and was staring into the distance at a fruit tree on the side of the road. On this tree, there was something moving in the wind and glistening in the sun. I went for closer inspection and saw that all the trees were covered in cassette tape from old audio cassettes. This was a vernacular technique to use the obsolete media to ward off birds and stop them eating the fruit on the trees. So I started following the trail of cassette tape, and this led me into an orchard of clementines. And deep into this orchard, I noticed that cassette tape on the trees here was much thinner than in all the rest of the places. And on closer inspection, I realized that this cassette tape was from a kind of mini cassette, the type usually used in old personal dictaphone recorders. So anticipating a kind of biographical, confessional and personal content to this recording, I collected all the dictaphone tape, and from the trees, and I harvested the voice that was on the surface of this tape. The voice on the cassette was mostly recoverable, and to my great joy, what I found on this cassette was a scholar's personal interpretations of the Druze scriptures. At the beginning of the tape, we hear his voice identify himself as Wissam Abu Dargham, a student of the prominent theological Druze scholar Dr. Sami Makarim. There are sections of this recorded monologue that are specifically about the concept and practice of Taqiyya, and it is these sections that I will play for you today. So here, Wissam is where he first defines the concept of Taqiyya. And I will have to translate what he says because it's a bit messed up, the tape.
In our part of the world, mothers talk to their newborn babies in a language called Apu.
Did you hear that? In our part of the world, mothers talk to their newborn babies in a language called Apu.
It is a two-syllable word composed of Ngr and Apu.
It is a two-syllable
Means
word.
nothing. Has no meaning.
It means
It's
nothing.
Two sounds, Ngr and Apu.
It's just two sounds.
Used to
Ngr,
communicate
Apu.
with the newborn child. The
It's used to
newborn
communicate
baby
with a newborn
doesn't
child.
understand. Doesn't have any way of processing this information in its brain to really understand anything other than the abstract sound of the mother's voice.
The baby doesn't have any way of understanding the meaning other than just the abstract sound of the mother's voice.
Communicate.
So what does the Ngr Apu communicate?
It is care.
There's love and it is care.
Sounds that don't make any linguistic sense, but transmit the mother's love.
So the child receives these two sounds that don't make any linguistic sense, but they transmit the mother's
The
love.
language will grow with the child as the mother will raise the communication skill to a higher level.
The language will grow with the child, and the mother will raise the communication skill to a higher level.
When the child has grown older, the mother will say, "Let's go for breakfast." Then, when the child grows older again and goes to school, the mother will say, "Take your sandwich with you."
Did you hear that? When the child grows older, the mother will say, "Let's go for breakfast." When the child grows older again, the mother will say, "Take your sandwich with you."
When the child becomes a student in college, there is no way the mother will say to her child, "Ngr Apu."
When the child grows old and goes to college, there is no way the mother will say to the child, "Ngr Apu."
So Taqiyya means the means of communication that you adapt to any person based on the amount of knowledge that he or she is capable of understanding. Taqiyya means you speak to people on the level of the other's readiness to listen.
Taqiyya means you speak to people on the level of the other's readiness to listen. This is Wassam's definition of taqiyya. From an early age, Druze learn how to pronounce correctly all the Arabic phonemes, which is not done by any other group of Arab speakers from the Gulf to the Atlantic. The correct pronunciation that many Druze speak is made audible to most other Levantine Arabic speakers by the articulation of the Arabic letter qaf, a letter most closely aligned with the English letter Q, but here the sound is produced at the Adam's apple. So it's this one. Qa, 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 qa. Let's try again. Qa, 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 qa. The Druze have become known for pronouncing this letter, as throughout the Levant one rarely hears this letter articulated as it appears in the alphabet, but hears it dropped and pronounced as earth, replacing the qaf sound with a glottal stop, similar to the British T in the word butter, which is often pronounced butter, butter or butter, taqiyya or ta'iyya. So this is actually another point that Wissam makes.
Truth means that you have to respect the words.
Truth means you have to respect the words.
Truth of the language, you have to pronounce it as it is.
When you respect the truth of the language, you have to pronounce it as it is.
To elaborate your pronunciation properly as the language intends also carries a meaning with it on the level of truthfulness.
To elaborate your pronunciation properly as the language intends also carries with it a meaning on the level of truthfulness.
We pronounce all the Arabic phonemes correctly in order to stick to the basic rules of the language itself.
We pronounce all the Arabic phonemes correctly in order to stick to the basic rules of the Arabic language itself.
If I pronounce the letter qaf as I'm not saying it correctly, so I'm not speaking the truth.
If I pronounce the letter qaf as I'm not saying it correctly, so I'm also not speaking the truth. I'm not saying it correctly, so I'm also not speaking the truth. Both words in the Arabic language that mean truth, haqiqa, and trueness, sidq, both contain the letter qaf, which means to literally speak the truth, one must pronounce the qaf. If one drops the pronunciation of the qaf and pronounces the word truth with a glottal stop, which would be haq as ha, they are simply not speaking the truth as it truly sounds. So here the sound of the word and its meaning are in a highly sensitive relationship, and the theological context for this is that God created the Arabic language, and its words are considered divine creation just as much as the things to which those words refer. So that means that the Arabic language, under this conception, is not a representation of things in the world, but actually language is another mode for that thing to exist. Language is thing. The sound of the spoken word in Arabic is therefore, under this conception, inherently onomatopoeic, whereby the form of the thing and its sound are one and the same. In fact, onomatopoeia in English has come to mean words that mimic sound of the thing to which they refer: crow, bell, wood, drum. But its original meaning is a composite of Greek words that mean making or creating names, the original forging of vocal sound to an object, a process that is at the genesis of all languages, regardless in the belief in God as the creator of language. So in all of its articulations, God intended truth to be enunciated with one's Adam's apple. Sidq, sidq al-lisan, literally, the trueness of the tongue, is the term used to not only govern speaking of the truth, but pronouncing the words correctly. Yet the Druze have another way of writing this word, sidq, literally sincerity or trueness. They have another way of writing sidq from other Muslims. You see, Druze replaced the sad sibilance with the other S sound in Arabic, sin. So rather than pronouncing it sincerity, it's pronounced sincerity. You see what I mean? It's not sincerity, it's sincerity. Sin, sad. So sidq becomes sidq. 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 Here the pronunciation of the truth, where the sidq with the sidq, remains almost completely intact. There is a small deviation. If you say it quickly, it's, you get somewhere. In sound, it's a very small deviation, almost too minute to pick up. And if you're really not listening out for it, you won't hear it. صدق 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 صدق. Though the form of the written word is completely altered, completely. Truth, though it may sound the same to those who hear the word pronounced, literally takes a different form. So by deviating in the spelling of the truth, it is claimed that there is another understanding of what it means to speak the truth amongst the Druze. Mostly other people claim that. That speaking the truth is not about what you said, but in the way of saying it, in the pronunciation of the letters themselves. So you can always be pronouncing the truth, while in fact the meaning of the words you speak are not so faithful. You see what I mean? You might, truth can sound true, but it's not necessarily true. However, this non-verbal truth can be at times just as revealing. For example, pronouncing the qaf would often reveal your true identity as Druze, as it is mostly only the Druze who pronounce the qaf. So even if you claim something to the contrary, the qaf speaks for itself. It doesn't speak at the readiness of the other to listen, adapting to their way of hearing. Rather, it asserts its difference on the ear of your interlocutor, a difference that has been historically fatal to reveal. And Wissam also makes an interesting comment about this.
I'm not saying it correctly, so I'm not speaking the truth.
I'm not saying it is before.
One of the main mistakes of the Druze minority is that they are not practicing Taqiyya properly.
One of the main mistakes of the Druze minority is they're not practicing Taqiyya properly.
If you take the case of the Druze community worldwide today, or any other minority, the mistakes of those minorities is that they take on a group ego.
So if you look at the case of the Druze, the mistakes is that they take on a group ego. They make a sign above their head saying, hey, look at us, we're a minority. And in the understanding of Taqiyya, you have to blend into your surroundings. Taking on a collective ego is a breach. And in any minority, if they really are practicing Taqiyya, they should not label themselves as an identifiable community. So according to Taqiyya, if I'm a Druze living in Beirut, surrounded by non-Druze who don't pronounce the qaf, I should not pronounce qaf, I should pronounce qaf as af. If I'm living in the mountains, in a Druze area, I should pronounce the qaf qaf, unless the af is accepted there. I should vocalize it qaf. But in general, if I speak with af or qaf in any community in order to get attention to my ego, under Taqiyya I'm doing something wrong. So it's a very thin line because speech is really interconnected and entangled with ego. So in linguistics, the name for Taqiyya is accommodation theory. And accommodation theory identifies two different types of speaker, convergers and divergers. The divergers are those stubborn individuals who maintain a form of speech that is distinct from those they are speaking with. This will to diverge is a mark of their linguistic territoriality or other vocal origin to which they strongly identify. The convergers are those generous souls who assimilate through a constant process of dissimulation, constantly adapting, always able or willing to inflect their speech to be in greater proximity and conformity to those they are in dialogue with. The convergers are those who constantly deviate from their true linguistic origins, or perhaps are simply not bound to any linguistic origin at all. Rather than a speech that identifies itself and is in turn easily identifiable, the convergers speak in many accents, with multiple tongues. Their speech is malleable and mimetic, contagious and contaminated. Yet those who practice Taqiyya are neither convergers nor divergers. They are a rare amalgamation of the two forms of speech, a converger-diverger. When one speaks Taqiyya, with each word they pronounce, they are making a sound that is at once dissonant and consonant to the ears of those who hear them. A woman is talking with a friend without using the letter qaf, but when a member of her family calls her on the phone, her deep glottis suddenly springs into action. What you hear is a subconscious practice of taqiyya or code switching that is deeply embedded as any other instinct of survival. If you don't speak Arabic, you're at a distinct advantage. You're able to listen to this recording as pure vocal sound. So listen for the qaf.
مشان هيك هلا انا ما بعمل فيها شيء، كل ما بدي اعمل شيء الو مام ما في. عن جد حتى قلت لها اسم الله صارت كثير كبيره بده يتغير البو، بدك تيجي تشتغليها شي يوم.
Talking about a plant that has been in the family a long time.
احكيها هلا وانا هون لانه بدنا الريسيبي تبع التاكوز تبعه.
If you speak to your mom now, tell her I want the recipe for tacos.
ايه it's good time. يلا. الو. ايه مام هاي كيفك؟ ايه شو عم تعملي؟ خلاص اخذتي نيمو ورجعتي؟ ايه جود. ممكن بدنا نسألك عن هالشتلة هيدي العظيمة نسرين عندي واستحلتها كثير. بلا مام الشتلة اللي جبناها من جدة شو بكي؟ ايه عم تصفر كثير ومش عارفة شو بدي اعمل لها. قولك هيك؟ بحط لها شوي حديد من هو تبع الجردانيا يعني؟ ايه اوكي. ايه حياتي، ليكي معك شوي وقت اسألك شغلة تاني بعد؟ ايه كانت نسرين بدها تسألك عن الروسات التاكوز. ايه قلت تتذكر كنت تعملي لهم اياهم هن وبس.
So Taqiyya is not unlike the freedom of speech.
ايه يلا اذا قلي لي نتفي هيكون نتفي.
It is the right for free expression, but it is more like the freedom of the speech itself. Rather than the freedom to speak, it is the freedom to use your voice to mimic and mutate, to dissimulate in order to navigate the sometimes hostile terrain of those ears that prey upon your voice.
لازم كزبرة صح؟ ايه.
It is not the freedom to stake a claim, nor the freedom to say whatever you want, but the freedom to use speech as a tool to become anything you want. And Wissam also compares this to the freedom of speech.
بتقلك تفضلي عليك قاعدة على التاكوز.
In the freedom of speech, I'm legally allowed to say anything, to say whatever I want. But when we think about this in relation to Taqiyya, it's more like the freedom of speech is the freedom to remain silent. Taqiyya means that I'm allowed not to speak. If silence is not part of the freedom of speech, then speech will not be free. Taqiyya is not unlike the right to silence.
سوري هاي بسونتي.
Her daughter calls her now.
هاي شو يا عمري؟ You're coming home ليه شو في؟
Taqiyya is not unlike the right to silence.
كثير منيح. يلا يا عمري أنا ناطرتك و it's great. عندي حدا نعم عندي أصحابها لخالتك أوكي وبقولوا لك Hi.
Taqiyya is not unlike the right to silence, the legal right against self-incrimination, or pleading the Fifth Amendment as it is often referred to in the USA.
يمكن بدها تقلك عن سانت أندروز قديش حلو.
Taqiyya is a legal dispensation to not speak the whole truth if the truth may cause you harm.
عندك خبرية وقليلة مثل ما بدك.
Yet silence and secrecy infers guilt in today's all-speaking, all-hearing world.
صاحب يا قلبي.
And Taqiyya's strength is that it can exist as silence in the guise of speech. Taqiyya does not produce the loud present absence of silence. Taqiyya is silence camouflaged by words. In Taqiyya there is no binary division between what one says and what one does not say. There is not one but many silences that fill the spectrum of speech. From ingr apo to the pledge of Islamic conversion, a whole range of silences can be employed. Unlike the freedom of speech, the right to silence is not a human right, and only granted to citizens of nations who employ this law. So in conditions of statelessness, or in precarious jurisdictions, or in any other context where silence itself is criminalized, Taqiyya will continue to play out in the minutiae of human utterance. It is adapted by individuals who inhabit in between spaces, and it is in fact a legal right to inhabit such in between spaces. The space in between truth and lie, the space in between the act of saying and what was recorded as said, the space in between resistance and capitulation, between converger and diverger. Taqiyya is simultaneously a subservient and subversive form of political action. Taqiyya is a contradictory concoction of simultaneously speaking freely and remaining silent. Taqiyya is the only legal right that recognizes the inherently unfaithful nature of the voice. And Wissam has the final comment.
Taqiyya is the truth.
Taqiyya is the truth. Bye bye.